Welcome back to TeamTalk from Team Kinetic with me, Chris Martin.
And me, Imo Greatbatch. TeamTalk is a podcast that dives deeper into the world of volunteer management and gets to know the people who help make volunteering happen, why they do it, how they do it, and what they want to see change. If you're new to listening to the podcast, a big warm welcome. And if you've listened before, a big warm welcome back. Season 3 of the pod, as we continue this journey, we continue to follow the themes of the vision for volunteering. And this season has been one of the most interesting, with the theme being on power and its role in volunteering.
Today's guest is a certified coach and facilitator, a freelance social impact consultant, which we're definitely going to discuss. But the particular reason I was so keen to get her onto the pod was because she's a certified Lego Serious Play facilitator. And who doesn't want to know more about that?
So Katherine Perrin, welcome to TeamTalk.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
It's great to see you, Katherine, and welcome to the pod. So, where do we start? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey and what brought you into the sector?
Yeah, of course. I guess I've had one of those squiggly careers like a lot of people have when you delve into their stories.
That is the consistent thing that everybody says at that point. Yeah.
I think it makes us interesting, right? And so straight out of uni, I started in local government in the National Graduate Development Programme scheme.
Okay.
That was great, rotated around a number of departments, did a load of projects. Really useful insight into local government, but also at that point felt it wasn't a great fit for me.
Yep.
And from there moved into the sector. And yeah, I guess just one of those things that I found my tribe, that it was full of wonderful people doing incredible things. And I just was so inspired by the scale and the depth of the sector and their ability to get things done on such limited resources in the face of huge challenges. So yeah, I was lucky enough to join a council for voluntary service, which is like a charity for the voluntary sector, for want of a better way of describing it. So they provide funding advice, startup, they do a lot of kind of advocacy and campaigning, sit on kind of strategic bodies to represent the sector. And there I learned a huge amount about the sector, including co-running a volunteer centre. And then I went on to join a hospice, and I was there for about 8 years, leading the volunteer work with about 1,000 volunteers. Doing a huge amount of amazing, incredible roles, and then did some kind of strategy and business plan and project management type work. And then about 2 years ago, I went self-employed.
How was that for a change of direction? How did you find that?
It's been a roller coaster. Anyone who says it's easy is lying through their teeth. But yeah, it's how to describe it. It's the best thing I've ever done career-wise, hand on heart, but it isn't without its challenges. So I went self-employed when my kids were very young, so that felt hugely risky in that kind of period of, cost of living crisis.
Yep.
Non-negotiable mortgage,
uncertainty.
Yeah, huge childcare bills, etc. And I didn't know if I could make it work. So yeah, it felt a big step to do.
Yeah.
But I haven't defaulted in the mortgage 2 years on, and I feel like that's something I'm immensely proud of.
Yeah, I think you should. That's good. That's good. And you mentioned obviously your career path is taking you from the brokerage side and the infrastructure side into what you would consider to be the more traditional management side, which is, again, not necessarily a straight line career choice through the sector. How would you sort of reflect on the difference between those two roles, being on that infrastructure side versus being on the direct sort of more day-to-day volunteer management side of things?
Yeah, I mean, they all come with their own benefits and challenges, right? And so I think the beauty is I've seen both sides. I've seen the direct delivery side. I've seen the background of the infrastructure side. And I guess what I hope is that it gives me a kind of breadth of experience and expertise that I can bring into supporting lots of different organisations now in the work that I do. But yeah, I feel enormously privileged to have held the roles that I've held. I think not only have they helped my career and kind of professional development, but without trying to sound twee, they've made me a better person. You know, you can't spend 8 years in a hospice without being changed by it. You know, it's an incredible life experience where you can't help but come away and think, yep, life is short. You know, we have to hold the ones we love close. We have to cherish the days that we've got. You know, something huge that I took from working in hospice is that actually the humor that's there, you know, the love, the warmth, they're not the places people often imagine or fear they might be. You know, the kind of warmth, the laughter, it radiates around those buildings. So actually it's an incredibly lovely place to work.
Yeah, I think we hear that consistently from people that work in that space, that there is a sense of deep pride, a sense of really making that difference. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? I think if we could distill that into its essence.
Yeah, and it's amazing to hear that you've gone into the kind of coaching profession and facilitating, really people-centered. Before I dive into a little bit about that, I'd love to know, when you opened, you started talking about you found your tribe. When you squiggled into the sector, what made this your tribe?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I guess the passion for people doing the work, I think, is probably the common thread that runs through it. I think that's what really struck me about the sector, that you've got so many people who have started out in the sector because of a personal experience that happened to a friend, you know, a family, a loved one. I met so many people who, like, with a friend around a kitchen table, were like, we've got to change X. And they're motivated, they're passionate, they're driven to make that change, whether it's about supporting mental health for children, whether it's animal related. You know, there's so many passionate people that go, actually, they've seen something, instead of sitting on the laurels or moaning about it, they've gone, yeah, let's do this. Let's do something about it. And I think you can't help but be energized by that. And I think that's true in the small and the large organizations. It's something that, you know, it does make a work-life balance harder, I think, because you get pulled into it. And that's hugely, I think, one of the challenges of the sector. You know, we can talk probably in this league, can't we, about the challenges of the sector where, you know, there are huge resourcing and funding challenges that are going on at the moment, the huge expectations, the huge the pulling back of the public sector, which means that the demand for the voluntary community sector is greater than ever. But it really is the passion that keeps people going. And I just thought, this is phenomenal. You know, I am someone who does think that I want to leave, sounds silly to say, but leave the world a better place than I left it. And I'm not saying I'm, you know, going to change the world, but I think, wouldn't it be lovely if we all made something incrementally better, you know? And yeah, that's a big hope of mine. And I think going into the voluntary community sector, I was like, yep, this is it.
I often say to people, when you try and say out loud what it is that attracts you to it, it never quite comes out. It all comes out sounding a bit cheesy, but it is.
Yes.
I think that's okay. I think you just got to own it a little bit. That, you know, it attracts that kind of person that does want to make the world a better place. And like you say, no one's so arrogant to think they can change the world on their own, but you want to feel like you're part of something that might.
Yeah, and I think that's it, isn't it? Feeling like you're part of something. When you meet other people who've got that same perspective, you're like, actually, collectively, we can potentially move the needle on this. Yeah.
And so, like, you really talked about within the charity sector, that sense of purpose. What gave you the change in moment to go, my purpose is now going to be self-employed and I'm going to move to this coach and facilitator piece? Because that is a huge jump, as you say. So what was the kind of newfound purpose or like confirmed purpose that made you confident to make that move?
Yeah. I guess some of it was recognizing the experience that I built to date. And I think I'm not very good sometimes, like a lot of people, you have that imposter syndrome thing of like, what could I do? And it wasn't actually until I'd been approached by a couple of people saying, oh, could you help us with this? And I was like, why are they asking me? And it really made me reflect on the roles I'd had to date and thinking, actually, no, I have got, you know, a good breadth of experience and expertise to bring. I think there was something I found about from a very personal perspective, employment, where there's occasions perhaps where you can find a little constricted by a job description, that's the kind of box that you're within. And I had loads of kind of varying interests that meant going self-employed I could support. And the thing I love most about it is I get to work with lots of different organizations and individuals, all in the kind of non-profit or social good space. So for me, it was kind of still with that same sense of purpose. I'm not doing it for holidays in Bali. I'm doing it to cover my mortgage. There's a real misconception about consultancy. Trust me, it's not as glamorous swanning through coffee shops as certainly I thought it might be, a decade or two ago. The reality is very, very different. The vast majority in this space are just trying to replicate our kind of employed conditions.
Yes.
With a bit more flexibility, working with different organizations. And so, and that's definitely the thing that pushed me to think, actually, I've got something I could contribute. And the idea of supporting a number of different organizations and individuals really appealed.
Yeah. And just for people maybe that aren't quite sure what a coach and facilitator does, can you sort of summarize it? It's one of those sort of more, should we say, it's a newest type of job.
Yeah.
So, and again, it's that squiggly career. Can you sort of just give people a bit of an idea of what you're, not so much the consultancy, because I think people get that, but the coach facilitator part. Just share us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, so as a certified coach, I've gone through training and been certified. And with coaching in particular, you are supporting someone to get more understanding and gain new insight into a situation. So often you're helping someone to look at achieving a particular goal or overcome a particular challenge or issue. So people can specialize. You can do it in people's personal lives or professional lives. I tend to focus on the more kind of professional career-based coaching. And you can support people in terms of a change in role, or two people I'm coaching at the moment are in leadership roles, but they're often the only person in that organization. So it can be a really lonely role to hold. And I know from my management experience what that feels like, not to have someone to bounce things off of, not to have that kind of infrastructure or that network to hold them to account a little bit, to do some gentle challenge, to nudge, to ask those extra questions of like, so why is that important? Have you thought about this? What's the reason behind that? So coaching is all about helping someone find their own path. So it's not about advising or directing. It's about asking really good questions to get people to have new understanding and insights. And you can do that for a short amount of time or a long period of time. It's really dependent on someone's situation. And then for facilitation has a lot of parallels. So again, it's not about making decisions for the people you're working with. People often talk about holding space, which is a bit of a funny phrase, but it basically means kind of creating the conditions that people can do their best work.
Okay.
And that can be creating something together. So problem solving, making decisions. You can be ideating, creating ideas for something. You can be having quite difficult conversations. Again, it's about helping. This one's more in a group situation. This is about helping a group get closer towards a goal that they've set. But you're there just to support them in that process. Again, you don't direct and advise. So I guess the common thread is it's all very people-based.
Yeah.
And it's you not being centre stage. I like being that kind of support, the infrastructure, I guess, funnily enough, to support people to do their best work. And it's wonderful when you see the journey people have been on from that kind of position of, communication that could be better or being stuck on something. And then that trajectory at the end of going, okay, now there's more trust, or there's better communication, or we've understood each other more. We've now surfaced these, tricky things, and now we know how to move forward better.
You obviously, it takes a certain personality type. You got to have a lot of, I imagine, empathy and patience to work with people. Were these things that you were thinking about doing in your, was it sort of something that developed through your work previously, your sort of professional work, or was it more a sort of a sense of I've got some skills that I'd like to use, and that's maybe the place I can go and use them? Was it sort of part of the career development, or has it sort of happened adjacent to the career? I guess one question what I'm asking.
Oh, it's a good question. Possibly a bit of both. I think I realised that they were things that I was already doing in lots of my roles, and actually they were kind of common threads. And the beauty of going self-employed is you can determine your own job title, and you can
Of course,
determine, you know, the focus of your work. And I guess that was the beauty of it. When I was trying to think, oh, what would I like to focus on? I realised they were the things that I had loved doing the most in terms of I got really good satisfaction out of it, and also I loved seeing the results of people going, now we're in a better place. And there's nothing better than that, you know. I genuinely log off being really happy with, you know, the work I've done. It's a real I know, and again, I know it sounds twee, but I feel really privileged to be in this position to be able to do it.
It's funny, from a sporting perspective, I got much more satisfaction when coaching people than I did from playing. And I still do now. It's funny, you know, because you don't know, it's just nice to see other people benefit from it. I think maybe it's just some people feel that way, some people are more, you know, internally motivated. But yeah, it is if you have that, if you're that way wired up, it's a very satisfying way to earn a living if it's going well.
I was just going to agree and say that there's something about the sector also that I recognise, that the lack of competitiveness really struck me, you know, and what you were saying about, you know, the ability to recognise someone else or a different organisation has done something well, to back them up, to share resources, that kind of camaraderie is phenomenal. And I think that's something that I've really valued about the sector as well.
Interesting. We may come back to that. Like a little note for myself. The other thing that's on your CV is measuring social impact, and I often think that measuring social impact is a bit like trying to catch water. You know, it's a very, very challenging thing to do well. So I was wondering, you could tell me a little bit about your approach to that, how you approach an organization if that's what they're asking you to do, what your process is, what your thinking is around helping organizations understand the social impact they make.
Yeah, great question. And I guess you've hit the nail on the head. It is so tricky sometimes, and there are lots of different ways that you can do it, which I think is one of the challenges for organizations, particularly when you don't have a lot of resources or potentially kind of internal expertise to tackle it. And obviously what we're seeing more and more is it's more and more of a priority, particularly around funding, to demonstrate the impact of the work that's done. So you've got a kind of dual challenge, haven't you, of an increased need to do it, and those challenges around resources of being able to kind of get the work done. And so, I mean, I'm very pragmatic in the work that I do. You know, you've got to work within the constraints that an organization presents you with. So you've got to find a way of doing it that works within the capacity of the organisation that's come to you. And there are lots of different ways. And I guess what I talk to an organisation about is coming back to fundamentals, which is the questions of why do you want to do it? What's important about doing it? Because sometimes you get an organisation that wants to do it because, and you go, okay, well, let's talk about that. Why the because? What's the motivation to do it? Kind of let's go back to basics. So you're really clear about the purpose of it. And then the next thing is, what are you going to do with it? So some people get caught up in quantity over quality. And they go down the road of let's have, 27 in-depth measures. You go, okay, so what will you do with the information that comes out at the end? And actually, sometimes what you find is only sort of 5 to 10 of them are going to create a different decision or action. And then that's really revealing in itself. And so my advice often is that less is more. You're better off finding a small basket of good measures that you'll do something with and can potentially build on over time with capacity or kind of practice or increased knowledge, rather than trying to create everything all in one go and get caught up. And then you've also undermined the process. It won't be owned. People won't feel empowered to go on and do it because nothing will change as a result. So I guess for me, it's a lot about understanding why. It's about looking at less is more, and finding a methodology that suits the organization. So there are some really in-depth ways to do it, which are phenomenal, but they are incredibly complex and can be very costly with the models that they have to do. And when you go back to the why, often you can find something that works for the organization, and also keeping that really broad mind about whether it should be qualitative, whether it's about case studies, excuse me, podcasts, quotes, etc., or whether you want to dip into things like infographics, statistics. And there are lots of different ways that you can go about doing it, but it's about finding measures that fit for the organization.
And just on that, because I think this is really interesting with the concept of the power theme and vision for volunteering, that strives for a future where volunteers in the communities they serve lead on change that matters to them. When you go through that kind of purpose, less is more, and then the methodologies behind it, do you experience much tension between organisation and volunteers, or do you find actually that purpose-driven approach unites them?
Some and some. I think a lot of that would come down to how you've approached it. And I'm a big fan of co-design, which is hugely growing in kind of popularity at the moment, which is brilliant to see, where people are recognizing that the people who are affected by something need to be involved in its development. So it's brilliant to see that more and more in people's kind of policies and practices. And if you're doing something that involves volunteers or impacts them, got to get them involved in that development. It's, you wouldn't do it to staff, and yet we see that it happens time and time again with volunteers. And I'm holding my hands up, I've been guilty of it. So please don't think I'm sort of sat here polishing my halo thinking I'm immune to that. We've all done it. The difference is you've got to, recognize you've done it and hold your hands up and learn from it. But yeah, it's so important to involve the people that are impacted in it. And there are different ways we can do it with volunteers, but it is so, so important to recognize the impact on them and to have their voice and experience brought into that process to go, right, what are we going to do? Why are we going to do it? Get them involved in it, get them to understand the why. And you'll often break down an awful lot of the barriers to engagement and the use of it by having them involved at the start.
I do think the sector has a challenge with social impact and measuring social impact in it being convincing and being believable. Over the years, I've seen it. Over the years, it's often felt to me like people marking their own homework, and I feel that there's something, even though you've got all these methodologies and you've got these different approaches, I feel there's something there for something that an underlying set of fundamentals that then gives everyone a baseline to work from. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, because it does sometimes feel like I say, people, you never anybody come away and say, actually, that was a terrible thing and it went really badly, and these are things we actually learned from it, but we shouldn't do that again. Nobody ever comes back after they've had some funding from the lottery and says that. They always, oh, it's amazing, everything was amazing and wonderful, and everything can't be amazing and wonderful. So that's my sort of cynical hat on that. How do we build more trust into the outcomes, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Oh, that's such a big question. We could talk about that for a few days. How long have we got? Where to start? I mean, yes. So I guess the first thing I probably want to say is that, I think one of the challenges around impact measurement is that there are so many different ways of doing it. There are so many different definitions. There's so many different methodologies. It can feel hugely formal, involved, expensive, complicated, to the point where sometimes the result you might get at the end, where I've seen some methodology go, but does that mean anything?
Yeah.
On the street, you've spent a huge amount in the process and crunching all sorts of numbers, but what has that given you at the end? So I think that's a risk we have to recognize, and that with the huge number of different methodologies out there, you can get quite an inconsistency about the way they're applied, in that different organizations will measure slightly different things or use different methodologies, and then it can be really hard to work out which one has had potentially the most impact, which I think is why you go back to what's going to make most sense for you. So, for instance, something I love that I always bring up with people is infographics, and it's fairly light in terms of the kind of methodology of what you use. But the beauty of it is that it's fairly straightforward. It's beautifully impactful visually. And you can use them to illustrate a variety of different areas, from statistical data to some of the kind of lesser known aspects of a role. I did them at the hospice, and for volunteer drivers, we knew that they covered a great distance and were struggling to articulate how important that was. And in the end, we had their mileage from paying expenses, and we showed how far around the world they'd gone in a year. Now, that's a quantity-based one, so you could argue that doesn't show depth of conversation or impact on patient care, for instance. But there are different ways that you can do that to reflect. It
tells a story, it builds a narrative.
Exactly, and that's exactly. So you've got to understand that certain methodologies will deliver certain things, but for what we were using that for, that in its own stood solo and worked. And worked really, really well. I've gone down a rabbit hole with that one. What was the second part of your question?
Well, it was that validity question, really. How do we build trust in the evaluation work, in the social impact work? How do we make sure people trust it?
I think a lot of it for me is about being transparent about the process.
Yeah,
isn't it? And sometimes I think what we can deliver is those top line results, but being really honest to say, if you want more detail, here it is. This might be the headline, 6 figures that we're giving you, but actually here's how we went about it. Here are some of the assumptions we made. Here's what the data is based on. Here are the sample sizes. And again, that might sound big, scary words for people who haven't gone into that kind of quantitative analysis before, but actually there are ways of doing it that can be really straightforward. And sometimes you can say, look, this is based on a really small sample size, but this is what it's given us. So there's a risk to that. The
reader can make that choice.
But then you're allowed, it's like the advertising campaigns where you go, 99% of people recommend it. There's a tiny asterisk down the bottom that says my friend, and it's about being honest about where you got your data from and the kind of conclusions that you're drawing from it.
Well, and it's interesting you talk on the quantitative, but there's also like quite a push for more qualitative storytelling, narratives, and people actually bringing some of the data to life through actual stories of impact, of whether it's the charity's impact on the life and the cause they serve, or just kind of that individual's impact on the charity type thing.
Absolutely, because it's about people often, isn't it? If you're looking at impact, particularly around people, you can say that you've moved someone on a scale of confidence or independence or whatever it might be that you're measuring, say on an outcome star. But actually, hearing the words of, I met a new friend today, or I went and bought my own loaf of bread, or, I felt safer at school, whatever it might be that organization is providing, that's the really rich data. And it's wonderful if we've got more funders who are able to recognize that, and to recognize that this particular pool of organizations where they might have multiple funding streams are being asked to do multiple reporting requirements, and often they don't necessarily fit neatly together. So what I've seen in a number of organizations is they're having to kind of get a set of data and then kind of crunch it a number of different ways to suit different funders. And it can be a hugely kind of lengthy exercise to do, which also arguably takes away resource from doing the delivery that they want to do.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I know you said we were going down a little bit of a rabbit hole of social impact, and we could probably spend a whole episode on measuring that. So I'm going to sort of squiggle us over to what we talked about in the beginning of Lego Serious Play, because I think we mentioned it at the start, and I'm sure everybody listening would be really curious to know how that involvement kind of came about. How did you get into it? Where did you learn about it? And that side of things.
Yeah, of course. So I can talk about this one for probably years. So just show me a timeout symbol when I've waffled enough. I love it so much. Where to start? So I I can't remember now the first reference I came across, but it piqued my interest, and I bought a book on it. And I have never read a book associated with work as quickly as I read this. I inhaled it and just went, oh, what? This can be a job. I was fascinated. So I looked it up, realized you could get a certification in it. There are lots of different people that offer the certification, so did a bit of research, waited a while, because being self-employed, one of the many things you realize is that everything is on you. You know, everything you pay for comes out of your pocket. So all of your CPD, for instance, is another one. So when you look at certifications, it's a big decision to make. But I couldn't deny a draw to it. So eventually I did the certification, and I haven't looked back. So yeah, it's been an incredible experience, and I do now have a shameful amount of Lego in my house. And even though I've got 2 children, I think it's still probably more than most people think I should have. But honestly, it brings so much joy. So yeah, I can share a little bit about the kind of what the method is and how it works.
Lovely. That'd be great. Please do.
So one of the best ways I've heard of describing it is thinking with your hands.
Okay.
And for anyone who's thinking I've absolutely lost the plot, that's probably fair. So the way to describe it is it's a facilitation method. So it's a way of helping people explore and talk about a particular topic or area. So it could be something that they want to learn. So you've done a project, you want to do a retrospective, you want to look back, what went well, what didn't. You can use it there. It might be you want to create something together, like a vision, mission, values, and you can use it. It might be around building stronger relationships, learning about each other, learning more about your identity or your strengths or your particular challenges or your goals, and you can use it there. So it can be very lighthearted and fun in a more kind of team building sense, but it can also be really deep and reflective. It's all based on the questions that you set. So the way that it works is you're using the Lego bricks to represent your thoughts and ideas.
Okay.
So it's all based on metaphor and storytelling. And the real beauty of it is that you need no experience or qualifications. Everyone can get involved. You set a question, and everyone has access to the same equipment. And you physically build your answer, your thoughts, your reflections in response to the question. And then you share what your model represents. And then you reflect as a group on what you've seen and heard. And it's hard to describe if you haven't done it. But there's a real magic to it, where I love watching the kind of trajectory of a group, because you'll always get people going, don't know about this. Is this kind of forced fun? You know, is there going to be kind of awkward? And there's a real difference between that kind of forced fun where you're asked to kind of overshare, you know, be pushed in terms of your kind of psychological safety in a session, and this, which is kind of lightly playful, which allows you to do something that's very tactile. So using your hands, it's really engaging. So when we enter that kind of lightly playful state, you talk about kind of being in the zone, being playful. So it's that separation from long presentations and dry flip charts. You do something creative, so you get people to see things differently from new perspectives. You gain new insights, and it's collaborative, so you do it together, which means you gain new understanding and you arguably get a better outcome because you've all been in it together. So it's really good for kind of creative thinking and problem solving. And the reason I think I love it so much is because it brings together Lego, and who doesn't love Lego? But I think it brings together those aspects that have really pulled me through my career so far, which is that I have this really strong belief that you don't have to be overly formal and overly serious to do a good job. And I think sometimes absolutely the role or the situation does need it. But often I think we've overcomplicated work in that sense, and we've lost something in the kind of transition from childhood to adulthood. And there's something really lovely about bringing that back lightly in the workplace, where you get really good results, but the process is fun to do. And that for me is just a really lovely blend.
Yeah, it's that interesting thing, isn't it, that we associate hard work with, we've somehow taken the association of hard work and fun and separated them out away
Yeah.
from each other.
Yeah.
That they can't be mutually, they're not mutually exclusive. They can come together and we can, still achieve something impressive and enjoy it.
Absolutely. And there's loads of brilliant science that backs it up. I think there was an article in, I think it was 2017, which is that people who exhibit playfulness, there can be a danger of seeing them as less formal, less serious, less able to kind of achieve the goals they're set to. But actually, reality is completely the reverse. They're better at problem solving. Their ability to appreciate different perspectives is much higher, and they're much more able to find innovative solutions to challenges that come up. So actually, playfulness isn't just something that makes us feel good, it actually creates better results at the end.
Yep, it makes sense.
Definitely. Well, and I think I'm sure there's like Harvard Business Review research that backs it up, as you say, around kind of happy employees are more productive, more creative, better problem solvers, etc. There's lots of research out there of the benefits of it. So we definitely need to be playing more. I'm a full advocate of this Lego serious play. What does Lego allow participants to do that you can't do in a normal coaching session?
So the Lego Serious Play method is actually now open source. So while it was designed and developed within the Lego group, the organization that physically make the bricks, that's how it came about. They had such a success using the method, their own kind of method internally, that then it went out into the world and now it's open source. So while you have to be very careful in terms of using all the registered kind of trademarks and copyrights, and you have to be very careful about the disclaimers that the Lego group specifically aren't endorsing your work, etc. There's very clear guidance about
You can imagine.
Just to make sure absolutely that you're not in danger of wording it so that you're endorsed by them, then you're able to use the method. So while the method was originally developed for strategy and it remained in that space for a while, now the beauty is people have realized that it's a really flexible method, and now it's being used within coaching spaces, in project management, in therapy. So there's loads of different ways that it can be used, which I think is its beauty, because it's all down to how you interpret a question. So the beauty is all you need to bring is your own kind of thoughts and ideas and experience, and it's really democratic in that way. So it doesn't matter whether you've had 20 years experience or it's your second day, or whether you're chief exec or not. Everyone has the same equipment and the same time and space to build and share, which means it's a really flat kind of structure in which to work in.
I guess as well, it's shoulder to shoulder. When you cook with somebody and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's not adversarial. It's more, like you say, collaborative.
Something that really gets me is, and I can't quite put my finger on what it is or how maybe to explain it. Maybe I'll get it right, maybe I won't. But there's something magical about the fact that it seems easier to talk about challenging topics through Lego or kind of any other tactile means. There's something about a better ability to articulate things that are challenging or unsettling or uncertain through this medium than through your standard kind of talking routes or written routes like using your flip charts. And that's something really magical. So one of the sessions that will always stay with me is I did a session for a local group who work at the intersection of the trans community and drug and alcohol use. And it was a group who weren't known to each other, open to members of the public. And we explored their current relationship with drugs and alcohol. And we explored what they'd like their relationship to be 6 months from now, and kind of what steps they might want to take to get closer to that goal. And what was talked about was beautiful and heartbreaking. What they built was gorgeous. There were sort of walls, there was darkness, there were pirate ships. You could see and hear the emotions around what they were explaining. But using that metaphor really facilitated that conversation in a way that just might not have been possible without that tactileness. And when they talked about their goals, there was greenery, there was openness, there was building, there was connection, there was community. It came away being a session that really got me, but will stay with me because it gave me so much kind of hope, and their support for each other was wonderful to see. And again, it's just a great example, stepping away someone from that more kind of corporate side, excuse me, of how you can use the method in different situations.
How do people normally react when you tell them this is what you do for a living?
9 times out of 10, there's a beat of she's pulling my leg, and then they realize I'm not, and then they normally ask me to explain it a little bit, so I sort of try and do a kind of like, 1 or 2 sentence elevator pitch as a sort of summary, and then inevitably they always ask, have I stolen my kid's Lego? That is 9 times out of 10 the question I get, of have I left 2 children crying at home without their Lego?
That honestly, I think it's such an interesting approach, in the sense of there's almost like a distractive nature to it, which allows you maybe to have conversations that when you're looking at face to face in someone's eyes, you're unlikely to have when you're looking down, you're messing with your hands, and it just gives you, like I said, creates space for you to have a conversation whilst also being slightly distracted by the thing you're doing at the same time. So
yeah,
I can see how it could potentially work. I guess bringing it all back towards where we started from, really. So coming back to the sector, what we've talked about: coaching, we've talked about social impact, we've talked about Lego, and I guess how do we bring these into the big challenges the sector faces now? What, from where you sit and what you see, what do you think the big challenges the sector faces, and how might we solve some of them?
Wow. I think we need to recognize what the sector does. I think there is a big gap between what the sector is doing and what it's being recognized for.
Yeah.
That as the public sector has got smaller and smaller,
Yeah.
the voluntary sector has arguably stepped up in ways that is phenomenal, with the resource and the capacity and the funding that it has. So I think there's something about recognition that I think sometimes those in power don't fully understand what it's like to work in the sector, to deliver there, to work for the passion. When you look at the difference in wages between sectors, we're not doing it for the money. So I think there's something about recognition. I would love to see that more. And there's great projects that are, doing great work around that, like the Vision for Volunteering is. So there is kind of hope and movement there. The one challenge that I just keep hearing time and time again is funding.
Yep.
And I think there is something about the state of the kind of economy currently.
Yep.
The economy is really struggling. We've got the cost of living crisis. You've got challenges on all sides almost from that funding question, haven't you, for the voluntary sector, which is, individual giving is down, community giving is down. I was speaking to a charity the other day where they were saying it's 1 in 10 to 20 bids that we're now seeing as successful. A huge amount of effort to churn out those proposals in response for the amount they're getting. It's just soul destroying, I think. So I think there's something about the funding question, and I think that's probably in my head linked to the availability of funding. And I think there's something else that we've sort of touched on, which is the hoops that they're being asked to go through, both to get the funding and their kind of reporting requirements and their legislative requirements, regulatory requirements, etc. You've got people who are doing this for the love. They aren't doing it because they're IT experts, because they're impact measurement experts, because they're governance experts. So the support for these organizations needs to be there to enable them to do the thing that they're really good at and that they love.
Yep.
They started for in the first place. And I think there's a recalibration I'd love to see, which is around more long-term funding, more open funding, much less reporting requirements. So just those better trust-based relationships between funders and organisations to say, we believe in what you're doing. Here's a 3-year open-ended grant. We'd love to check back in with you, but maybe in a conversation, maybe come down and have a visit, and don't expect, 20 pages of analysis and what you're doing. I know, I'm a dreamer. I guess, I could talk about this book really well. They're probably quite a lot, but they're probably the 3 big things that kind of come to mind.
I think the resource challenge is, from what we're seeing, it's going to be a few years before we see a turnaround in that.
Yeah.
I think Labour are not going to turn the cash taps on anytime soon for local government, which I think is a problem. So it's going to be a real challenge. As like you say, you get a squeeze from both sides. The expectations are going up. There's more people need help because you've got a smaller general, a smaller general public sector, and less money to fund it, and that's problematic for organisations, definitely.
Yeah, and I guess there's something also about the sustainability of organisations as well that is going to be a huge challenge, and not just in terms of that kind of green sustainability carbon reduction angle, but to enable them to have longevity.
Pure economics,
they need to be ready for the next generations of volunteers coming through. They need to have systems in place now. They need, so there is there's a huge amount of work that needs to go on for organisations to kind of future-proof themselves for surviving the next decade or so. And again, it comes back to that resourcing, that without the expertise and without resourcing, that's incredibly hard to do.
It is, and fraught with risk as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But equally, the better we can kind of like story tell the impact, get the recognition, feeds into that kind of cycle of supporting, generating more resources over other areas. So I feel like this is sorry, Catherine.
Oh no, I was just going to echo that and say the other thing that's on my mind is collaboration. That another thing we can do is foster that collaboration, and all the way through from 2 organisations who might have similar goals and working more closely together, sharing projects, for instance, but all the way through to, I've got a policy, have my template. I came across this governance challenge. What did you do? So there's something about bringing people together and sharing that information and expertise that is definitely something that is hugely worthwhile to do.
It's almost like we've kind of brought us to a close by highlighting all 5 themes of the vision for volunteering with collaboration, awareness, appreciation, everything. It was perfect. So Chris likes to set me the challenge of summarising these really special conversations. So I guess we've covered loads. We've squiggled a lot of places. That seems to be our kind of like theme of today. So from unlocking passion through purpose-driven people in charities, where we started, to taking the personal leap, having identified those common threads, to becoming self-employed coach, facilitator, and serious play expert with Lego. I think this sense of holding space for you to unlock individual and group potential through personal support and open questioning, but also improving trust and communication through that kind of amazing physical experience of using Lego has been really, really special to listen to. As well as that big question that Chris asked around how we build trust in the evaluation of social impact, covering all the different things around purpose, less is more, and finding that methodology that really is simple and works kind of for you and the organisation. Right through to the end where we tackled what are the big challenges and how we're going to solve them. Just a small moment there. So thank you so much, Catherine, for kind of like covering all of that. We have one last thing that we like to do, which is to finish with 2 on you or 2 from you, which is where we ask you to share one word from your professional world and the kind of work that you've been doing, and one word from your kind of personal world as any volunteering that you've done, to summarize what you feel about volunteering in work and personally. So one word of what volunteering means to you professionally in your work, and one word of what volunteering means for you personally.
Personally, I would pick community, and professionally, I would pick inspire.
Nice. Lovely. A massive thank you from both of us for agreeing to be part of TeamTalk. If you listen to this conversation, it's triggered your curiosity to explore more about Lego Serious Play or any of the work that Katherine does, then we'll be putting links in the description for people to find out more. As always, if you have any questions or any suggestions or anything you want to share with us, then please email us at pod@teamkinetic.co.uk. We read all those emails and we'd love to hear what everyone's thinking. If you've enjoyed the episode, please subscribe. And until next time, please take care. Thanks a lot, guys.